Tech Nuggets, GNS3 overview, number 2. We're going to talk about a couple of basic features with GNS3. We're going to talk about how to open a previous project. We're going to go through all the buttons across the top and talk about what they do and look at how they work and that kind of thing, because sometimes they're not as intuitive as we'd like. I'm going to go down the sidebar icon buttons, which are different groupings of different objects that you can pull out and work with in GNS3. So we're going to go over all those kinds of things. All right, well, I've got my VM here that's running Ubuntu 18.04. It's got GNS3 already installed. It's the previous installation that we used in the earlier videos, and we'll use it to build on to the next thing. So I've started GNS3. There we go. Apparently I didn't click. And it will start it on up. And we can see here that we're presented with this project box, and we'll want to click on Projects Library that will show us our previous projects, which is unfortunately blank. To show it, it'll scan the file system, but only after we hit the Refresh List button. So once we've hit Refresh List, you can see it'll list all the different projects and if they're open or closed. And our project is Test Project 1. So we will click on that and then select OK. And that will open the project. And depending on how many objects it is, it may take quite a while to open or not very long to open or anything like that. And you can see here we've got our NAT and our Ethernet switch and our VPCS node that we have here. From our previous. Now, none of the nodes that have to be started are started, which is why the red dot is here, but we can do some of that, and we'll go over some of the buttons here to talk about that. So let's start across the top. So we'll work from left to right. So we could create a new blank project, which we don't really want to do. We can open a project, which should be the same box that we saw earlier, except in this case it's going to use a file system way of doing it. We can say test project and open it that way by hitting open. And it would reopen the project. Use a slightly different dialog box, but it's effectively the same thing. We can manage snapshots. Snapshotting is not a feature that's fully complete. If you're familiar with hypervisors or containers or the other pieces of software that use snapshots, this is not the same thing. It presents a dialog box that would be very similar to that, but the functionality is not quite there yet. I highly recommend not using snapshots. I've not successfully used a snapshot and been able to restore from it in any real good way. And I'll talk a little at the end of this bar about how we can go about making copies of a project so that we can go back and kind of get that same functionality, but it's not going to be quite as easy as a snapshotting function would be when we use a regular hypervisor. We can look at the labels where we hide and show interface labels, and you can see we talked a little about this earlier in the previous lab. When I click on it, we can see the interfaces that it's connected to, and sometimes you have to move the little objects or move them around because they're hiding in here. You can see that I grabbed the label and moved it to the side, or I move it up a little bit, I can see it, and I can click on it and move it around if I want to see it a little bit. And we can see Ethernet, so if you're not sure which Ethernet port should I be sniffing when I'm running Wireshark, this will turn the interface labels on and off. If we were running, I would be able to open all the consoles to devices that have consoles. Now, our Ethernet switch and our NAT in this case don't have consoles, but the VPCS would have a console if it were running. It's of course not running, so if I click it now, it'll just give me some kind of error message that says I don't have any devices that are running. So once we get it started, we'll come back and have another look at that. The 3 buttons here we talked about very briefly in the previous video, and they work very similarly to the way you would expect. They're going to start all the nodes, they're going to pause all the nodes, or they're going to stop all the nodes, which is often fairly useful. And in our case, we'll hit start, and we'll see the VPCS node starts. If we had a variety of other ones, be it VMs or containers or whatever, they would all start at that point, and it may take a while for our host system here to start all the sub processes that it needs to do. So one might need to be fairly patient with that. You can look and see what's going on. If you come over here to docs, we can turn on the server summary, and it will show us all the different things. We open them up, right? We get the little thing, and we can see what's running here locally. It tells us how much CPU, and if we make it a little wider, we can see how much RAM is in use. If there's a remote GNS3 where you have VMs that are running somewhere else, which is a feature that we're not using, but is possible, it will show you if you've got a remote GNS3 server running those. And sometimes that's useful, and sometimes it's not. When you're starting everything, sometimes it's nice to look and see how busy is the machine, because it'll be very, very busy. And then once it kind of calms down again, you can say, oh, everything got started. And again, different pieces of software are going to take longer or shorter times to boot, much like they would in the real world. So you may have to go look at their consoles to be able to tell what's going on. So I'll click the All Console and look at that. It gives me a console for the VPCS, which is up and running. And I can close that console and come back to it anytime. All right, so this will reload all the nodes, which basically says reboot them. Go back to where they were when they were fresh and new and right out of the, the picker over here where I picked them out, and it'll set them back to the way they were. Sometimes that's nice when you've been playing with it and you're like, I just want to blow away the configuration, and you can hit reset and it should reset them all. At the moment, mine are all at stock, so it won't do anything. Much of the rest of these buttons along here are basically for adding Visio or Draw.io type notes. I can add a note. I can add, if I want to add notes to the side, or if I want to add pictures, or I want to zoom in or zoom out, we can do that. I can draw boxes around things and push into the front and the back and that kind of thing if I want that. I can move it to the side and delete it and that kind of thing. We can zoom in and still afford to kind of move around a little bit. I can move out. We can take a screenshot of it and save a screenshot. Not functions that I use a lot, but they're there if that's the kind of thing that you need. All right, so the buttons down the side, I showed in the earlier video the two buttons that really matter in this case, which is this button here, which is basically all objects. We're going to browse all the devices. It's going to pull it out. And you can filter the device. If you know the name, you can type it in, or you can install devices, available devices. I tend to use the installed devices because there's the ones that are actually able to be run on the system. The buttons above it are all subsets of this browse all. Right, I can click on this one, which I believe is routers, but I don't have any routers installed, so it won't show anything. But I can show switches, and we can see an Ethernet hub and an Ethernet switch. And some of these are pre-installed ones that come with GNS3. If you were to go install others, you would be able to see them there. We can see end devices, which might be other clouds or the VPCS. I've installed several other devices here that we'll use in other videos. We have a GUI Ubuntu. We've got a Voios install. We've got a pfSense install. These are all basically end-user devices. And we've got security devices. So if you had a Cisco Pix or if you had something like that, it would show up in this list if you've coded it that way and tagged it that way. Again, I find the most useful one to be browse all, because I can just see them all together. I don't usually have a ton of them, so it's not necessary. I don't keep hundreds of different firmwares or that I want to run and play with. It's usually a couple of devices that I want to try. And of course, the last button here is the connector button, where I need to add links between objects, and that'll turn on and off as I want to go use that.